Warm welcome. This is the second of the FSC's Connect webinars. Is a first for us. We ran our first one yesterday. So to those who were on the call yesterday, just a very quick repeat. It is our second go. We may not be perfect, so just bear with us. The intent here is around Connect is to, as it says, is to connect people together, to connect us to the topics of the day. And to try and get some insight in terms of how do we position ourselves, our businesses, our families for what we're going through and post. And within the FSC, as we articulated yesterday, we've done a huge amount of activity with government and regulators, supporting members, and trying to articulate the voice of the sector, to the community, and more broadly to New Zealand through our media outreach. We work really, really closely with Sherson Willis. They've been fantastic partners of ours now for a number of years, and we thought it would be really valuable to have Trish, who's on my left on the screen, and Thomas on my right on the screen, to kind of just share with us their lens of what's happening with a political flavour, but also with a media flavour, and then a bit into what the future looks like. Just technically, as far as these Zoom calls roll, you'll note down the bottom of your screen, you've got a Q&A button. If you've got questions, just away you go. And for this one, we've left the chat button open, so if people just want to chat as we go, then so much the better. On that note, I will turn myself off and welcome Trish. And thank you, Trish, and thank you, Thomas. Over to you guys.
Good morning, Richard, and good morning everyone who has tuned into this webinar. As Richard has said, Thomas and I are going to have a talk this morning about really how the media and our politicians have responded to date through this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to kick off really with an overview on the media response, and then hand over to Thomas, and then we'll take some questions at the end. I think both the media and the political response are very much intertwined, so we'll try and talk through how that has been working. I think overall, one of the things that I would say is that we are coming into, we've just passed the second week mark of lockdown. What we are seeing more broadly, I guess, and it's through the media, it's also through the other businesses that we work with, is that now is that we're coming into the most difficult time. I think it's more difficult now for people psychologically. There was the initial adrenaline rush when we had all those major decisions. We quickly went from level 3 to level 4. Suddenly we were working in a whole new way. You had businesses who were essential services trying to figure out how that was going to work. Now we've come through week 2, and I think it is now a time where we're seeing everybody really psychologically needs to make sure that they are all supporting each other and trying from their bubbles out and through their workplaces and through how they're interacting with others in their workplaces and their customers, to really focus on how we can support each other to get through the next 2 weeks. If we look at media through this crisis, it is a very bittersweet irony, I guess, that I would say one of the worst impacted sectors has been the media. If you can imagine that for our big media companies, the revenue tap was literally turned off overnight. Even probably from about 3 weeks out from the actual lockdown, one of the first things often to go in a crisis situation is marketing spend. And that means that there is no advertising running through those media businesses. And New Zealand media, particularly in the last 5 years, has been doing it increasingly tough. And you would have seen all of the conversations around increasing consolidation of the New Zealand media, because they have really been in a fight for their existence and that fight has been against the giant online players, Google and Facebook, who really have come into this New Zealand market and just hoovered up all of the advertising spend. And our New Zealand media companies, even before this crisis, were in a very fragile state. Just looking structurally at that media environment now, you have NZME. I think now it has a share price somewhere around the 20-cent mark, which values that entire company, which is the New Zealand Herald, all of its outdoor advertising business and all of its radio network, values it at around $39 million, I think. You have Stuff, which is still Australian owned and has been wanting to sell for a long time, and NZME has been wanting to buy it. But this crisis will have only deepened the issues that Stuff is facing. Before this, you had obviously Mediaworks, who has New Zealand's second biggest radio network, already in a pretty parlous state and trying to sell off its television arm, which even last year was losing about $17 million a year. The problem for Mediaworks now is that their big revenue generators, which were radio and outdoor advertising, that advertising money has gone. The government also structurally was looking at a potential merger between TVNZ and RNZ, our two state-owned media companies. That at the moment is sort of got a question mark over it, and what everyone is now looking to see is how quickly the government might mount some sort of a rescue operation for our big media companies. There is a great piece today on Newsroom from Tim Murphy speculating about whether that could be in the form of a government loan similar to what Air New Zealand had. So the reason to sort of talk through what's happening structurally with media is that at a time when they are fighting for their very existence, they have been called on more and more by all of us as we try and understand minute by minute what's happening through this COVID crisis. And the one positive note I would say for New Zealand is if you look across all of our economy, if you look across our the way our democracy functions, if you look across our political parties, our Reserve Bank, etc., we went into what is an unprecedented crisis event structurally in the very best position we could. And I would give kudos to our major media and the senior reporters who have been working 24/7 really since the really rapid events around COVID-19 started to unfold to keep everybody up to date. Bearing in mind that those journalists working at the coalface are facing also some of the very tough realities that other New Zealanders, thousands of other New Zealanders are facing, because they're not sure how their employers are going to come out of this. And I know Mediaworks last week went out to all its staff and said, we would like everyone to take a 15% pay cut. So it is a very stressful time for the media, both in terms of their workload, but also in terms of just more broadly, they are facing an existential threat through this as well. In terms of actual content of media, following a similar pattern, I guess, to the focus of the government through this, the most focus has been around how New Zealand, from the government flowing through all of our health agencies, have been responding to try to flatten the curve and protect New Zealand from the dreadful outcomes that we've seen in other countries where COVID-19 has run rampant. However, similarly for business and economic reporters, the job has been to try to understand this pandemic and what the impacts are. And I think from speaking to some of the senior journalists, what has surprised them as well, and obviously they've been through the GFC and other major events, the Christchurch earthquake, where again we had a national state of emergency, but they, like everyone else, have never seen a situation like this where there is literally no roadmap out. And I think what I am, I think New Zealand as a country, we are very lucky in our senior business media that they are taking a particularly thoughtful approach to their reporting around just what that roadmap might look like, and trying to draw in the widest possible range of voices to give us a good sort of framework ourselves for trying to analyse what that roadmap might be. For individual companies, I think the key things to think about through this are the fact that while the media are obviously reporting on what is an incredibly difficult situation, they are also looking for signs of companies who are really doing an excellent job through this. And I note that for the Financial Services Council members, your sector is an essential service and you continue to work. You're dealing at the front lines with New Zealanders who are facing very real concerns about, how to protect their nest egg through this, what to do with their KiwiSaver, what does it mean for life insurance. And if you've been watching the media over the last few days, you would have seen some stories on both the good and the bad side reputationally. So there was an excellent story out of Z Energy where they have pledged to provide free fuel for Sir John's ambulance through this. So that's an example of a company really thinking about their core business and how they could apply their skills or their product to help out in a time of need. On the other side, you have seen heavy criticism of the likes of Kiwi Property, who, without a lot of EQ in the current environment, have been sending generic letters out to particularly small business who were renting spaces from them to say, you must pay your rent through this time. And I think that trend toward the opportunity for particularly, sort of essential service businesses in the first instance, businesses who are dealing at the pointy end of New Zealanders as they face the financial reality and impacts of this on them. I would say it is that time to, as John Key would say, really apply the front page of the Herald test. Think about every single customer interaction. Think about the personal reality and the nuance of every single customer reaction, and how as a business you are able to be emotionally intelligent in how you respond to that, because it will be the individual stories that at this point either can really make or break a company's reputation. And a great example also on that, and as sort of as a segue into Thomas, obviously you would have seen the break reputation situation this week with the Minister of Health, which was a great example of, in the current environment, just not actually thinking about how your personal or professional actions will reflect more widely in the current context. And it was an example of poor judgment which will cost him dearly. And so I guess in handing over to Thomas, that would be the one outtake for all of you and your companies through this is really be totally alive at every moment to the reality of your customers and what they're facing. And there will be some really strong opportunities for those companies who take that approach and are very thoughtful and useful through this for their customers. And I think it's a really great opportunity for the sector, and shout out here to the FSC in the way that they are running webinars like this to try and help the sector as a whole to demonstrate through this how it is really a critical service to New Zealanders and their families and to the broader New Zealand economy. So TP, if you're ready to jump in with your view on how to view this through a political lens.
Well, thanks, Trish, and good morning, everyone. And it's great to have the opportunity to do this chat this morning. I think this is the first time since lockdown I've put on a shirt with a collar, so it's clearly a very special occasion. I think it's interesting. I've sort of struggled articulating a political lens on the current situation, just because it is so unprecedented. And I know we're using that word unprecedented a lot now, and we're using it in a bunch of different regards, but I really struggle to think of a time when normal political transmission has been suspended to such a degree. I worked in the Beehive throughout the Christchurch earthquakes, which were obviously a significant event in New Zealand, but I think they were very different to this. They were in a discrete regional area, state of emergency applied to a discrete area, and in some ways there was a clear roadmap for responding to that state of emergency and managing it. Whereas for this, there just isn't. And I think all politicians are struggling to a degree in how they respond and how ultimately we then move to getting out of it. And it is quite extraordinary when you think only a few weeks ago we were talking about fairly mundane domestic political issues and policy processes, which now are just not even on the radar. And it really is clear that the only show in town when it comes to politics, when it comes to policy, is COVID, and any kind of the BAU activity that was previously very important to us as a sector has been suspended. And we've seen that in every area, from the default KiwiSaver review to the conduct of financial institutions work, to virtually everything really that is at select committee, where timeframes have been paused, and we don't really have a clear idea of when they will be resumed. Clearly, Parliament itself has been suspended. We only have the one select committee functioning, which is the Epidemic Response Committee. If we step back and go, how has the government responded, and how has the government handled the pandemic so far? And I think, after what was a slightly shaky and slightly slow response, it has been very hard to fault. Clearly, the PM's incredible strengths as a communicator have came to the fore at this time, and have really allowed us to, I think, be much more effective in our response to the pandemic than any other countries. And I mean, a key fact of any good pandemic response is clear, concise, and simple communication. And it's something I think we're very lucky. It is a real strength for the PM. It's been a real strength for the Director General of Health, and that has meant our response and kind of our understanding of the policy process has been really good and generally pretty solid. I did make the point, I think it was a little bit slow to start. I think just from some of the engagement I've had and talking to some political contacts, I think there was a little bit of frustration that perhaps the PM didn't move with quite the pace that was necessary. And when I say that, I mean, I think it's a case of 24 hours or 48 hours in some of the steps that were put in place. And I mean, I think that is probably a reflection of actually just the magnitude of the decision she was having to make, which certainly no peacetime leader of New Zealand has ever had to make. I think the other point which I'd really single out here is that we are generally quick to criticise our officials and our bureaucracy, and often rightly so. But I think generally the response of not just the Ministry of Health, but the broader bureaucracy that has swung in behind through civil defence and so forth has been good. There have clearly been some issues in regards to testing rates and enforcement of self-isolation and so forth. But across the board, actually, I think we've been pretty well served by officials as well as by our elected representatives. I think the next point I'd really single out, and I was pleased to see Minister Robertson mention this in the House in his speech on the economic package, but the legacy of prudent fiscal management that we've had from recent finance ministers, from Michael Cullen to Bill English to Stephen Joyce, is really paying us dividends. It is extraordinarily politically hard for any Minister of Finance to put aside money, to build up a surplus, to resist the easy political calls of spending money on whether it's tax cuts or infrastructure projects or welfare spending or health spending. But all those successive finance ministers did that. And they were very clear that was to give us those savings when that rainy day hits. And I mean, that rainy day has well and truly hit. And I think it's because of the sensible financial management of successive governments. We are now in a much better position than many other countries to respond, especially in the second stage, the kind of the rebuild and the recovery. The sort of fourth point I'd note is that it has been very clear and still is very clear that the response politically is the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance show. It is noticeable how other kind of key ministers, kind of Prime Minister's kitchen cabinet, have largely been sidelined. It is pretty clear that it is her and Grant Robertson who are running the show, and I think that even extends to the coalition parties. They are struggling to get air at the moment and to be seen, and that will be a fascinating process to watch as time goes by I think, especially for the New Zealand First ministers and the Green ministers, they will become increasingly conscious that they need to be involved and to be seen to be part of the response. So when I talk about the response has gone well, and it has been of a magnitude that has been hard for many of us to grasp. But the big but, and I think the thing we all need to grasp, is that actually the processes of the steps so far have been the easy ones. I think the real hard work, the real policy challenges for the government are ahead of them now, or coming at them like a freight train. Going into lockdown was the easy part. The much harder part is getting out of it, and the economic recovery for the country. And I know when you talk to ministers, some of the predictions of unemployment getting into double-digit figures is terrifying them, frankly, and they've got a laser focus on what will it take to create jobs and to minimise the economic impact of the lockdown. But there are tensions within government, and I think those tensions are going to become more apparent in coming weeks and months, of how fast do we get out of lockdown, how quickly can we allow business and the economy to return to whatever normality is in this kind of new reality, and what priority will be given to health measures in coming months versus economic. And I think those tensions will increase. There's no clear roadmap for this economic recovery, and it's going to require a lot of unorthodox policy thinking, and that might challenge some of the kind of ideologies within government. What we're seeing from people like Shane Jones is an indication that they want to see a slashing of red tape, perhaps a removal of some of the environmental and resource consent requirements to allow us to get those kind of nation building, big infrastructure projects and job creation projects off the ground. How will that sit with, perhaps the Greens, who obviously will be pushing for more of a kind of a priority of green-friendly projects, maintaining of environmental standards and so forth. And when you have ministers like Shane Jones, who have got literally billions of dollars to spend and are going to be sort of unleashed to do these large nation-building projects, job creation projects, it's going to be really interesting. I mean, we all know there are kind of challenges around probity and procurement requirements at the best of times. Over the next few months, the whole machinery of government is going to really be tested in the kind of competing and conflicting tensions of getting projects off the ground quickly to get the economy going versus, maintaining good process and also ensuring that public health measures are maintained, because ultimately that's the most important criteria of all. Finally, just quickly on the opposition, and this may be unpopular, but I'm actually going to give credit to Simon Bridges' work over the last few weeks. His initial tone was wrong, but since then I actually think he's done the vital and frankly pretty thankless job of holding the government to account in its response pretty well. He has gone out early on a number of issues which has helped move the government, whether that was from closing the border a few weeks ago, to driving up the testing rates, to closing schools, to pushing for compulsory quarantine now for everyone returning home. I think, him by actually publicly going out there has actually helped move the government towards those policy positions much quicker. Ultimately, people like Ashley Bloomfield are not God. The government has and will continue to get things in their response. And in the absence of any other parliamentary accountability, Simon Bridges has probably got the most important role of his political life, certainly to date, in holding them to account and keeping the pressure on them on all of our behalf. So I think, credit to him, he is in what is a difficult role. He is doing a not too bad a job. Finally, I guess, what does this mean for the election? I think who knows, really. It's still a very live question if the election will be held in September or not. Both National and New Zealand First have came out in the last 24 hours saying they think it should be held later. New Zealand First saying in November. The government is saying it will still be held in September. From a political support perspective, clearly at the moment it's a government show. It always is in the initial stage of a national emergency, and there is still huge support for government's response. There's private polling being shopped around showing, Labour with a huge lead over National, which is no great surprise. I guess just the one point I'd make is there's a lot of water to go under the bridge. The months ahead will be tough. The economy is going to clearly tank. I guess the question is by how much, and people are going to be doing it hard. And it's only natural that they will start to blame the government for this. So I think National will back themselves that they might be able to hold the government to account and leverage their economic credentials over the coming months. So I think it's still a very open question about where where the politics of the situation will land. So I think looking at the time, we might be running short. So I'll wrap up there, Richard.
Thanks, Thomas. That's awesome. And thank you, Trish. Folks, I'm just looking on the questions. There are a couple coming through. Perhaps, Thomas, I might just toss one at you if I can. So we're starting, all of us, to think about what happens after lockdown, and you've painted a pretty stark picture. Play out what happens in 2 weeks. What's kind of going through the government's minds, and what do you think ultimately happens about how do you lift the lockdown, and how do you get back to as normal as possible? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's a very live question. I mean, I think ultimately public health is the ultimate goal. I mean, I think I saw Helen Clark say on Twitter yesterday, which is true. It's not much use having a strong economy if you've got dead people. But you know, that's the kind of brutal assessment to a certain degree. I think they'll be looking to do a staged response. So clearly the numbers are looking positive that we might be able to move to perhaps to level 3 in some parts of the country in 2 weeks' time. Whether that will be all parts, I think is far from clear. And I think they are focused very strongly on what parts of the economy can they get functioning. You know, there's a real drive to where businesses can to get them operating again. So yeah, I'd expect to see a staged, gradual removal of restrictions, and I guess, you know, any return to where we were 3 weeks ago is a very long way off. And I think certainly from a kind of tourism perspective, any removal of international travel restrictions, I just don't think we'll see until next year.
Thanks, Thomas. So that conversation around eradication, which is starting to turn up a little, and we were talking about it yesterday. I mean, paint a picture where New Zealand has moved early, moved effectively, almost stands as a bit of an island. Well, totally stands a bit of an island, but in terms of the overall COVID discussion, becomes an island where there isn't COVID in New Zealand. How do you trade, keep connected to a global world when the last thing you want to have is people from countries where COVID is still active?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think trading will be so much the problem, because I mean, I think, you know, exports will still be able to go out. It's clearly going to be our other kind of big economic earners in tourism and international education and so forth, which will be really, really challenged. And I think, you know, there is a big focus from the government on what support can they provide for the tourism sector in particular. I think obviously clearly a big drive on domestic tourism. And I think, you know, they are, I think, very open in their thinking that what will be the opportunities for New Zealand in the future coming out of this, and that are there sectors that previously we kind of have pushed to one side in favour of the kind of easier money around areas like tourism that they can prioritise instead. But I guess come back to the point I made is that I think a lot of these questions the government doesn't know itself, and I think it really is just it's uncharted waters. And I guess to flip that, it's an opportunity. I think there's a real opportunity for sectors to go and engage with government. I think if, you know, take it from a financial services perspective, you have views and thoughts about actually what are some things that in normal times might not be entertained, but actually in these extreme, unusual times that the government could consider, which would help grow the financial services sector in New Zealand. And I think it's kind of contingent upon every sector to think about that and to really be engaging, because I think ministers are listening. They've got a pretty clear focus that they want to see how they can support and grow the sectors and portfolios they're responsible for.
And that, folks, is probably a nice way to close at 10:32. It's something within the FSC, and certainly in the FSC board, we're thinking through, which is how can we be constructive? How can we help beyond lockdown? Because to both Trish and Thomas's point, it's going to look very different when we come out of lockdown. So a huge thank you to Trish and Thomas. We're going to send out a poll in a moment, so feel free to give us your feedback. We're back next week with 2 sessions. We're segueing into the resilience conversation and the mental health conversation. So stand by for that. We'll launch those events later on today. And to Thomas and Trish, a huge thank you for sharing your insight with us. We are actively working around how do we message for New Zealand's benefits, and how do we take constructive comments to Minister Farfoy, the RB, and all the other government agencies to be part of the solution as we come out of this. My last point is, to Thomas and Trish's point, The financial services sector is an essential sector. That comes with a huge amount of responsibility. And as I said on the call yesterday, this is very much our moment of truth. This is where we actually help people make the right decisions, not only for the short term, but also for the long term. So I think incumbent upon us and our broad sector, we've got the wherewithal to actually add a huge amount of value at what is a very, very stressful time. The question is, how do we do that? And that's for all of us to consider. So folks, have a really safe Thursday, a beautiful Easter with your loved ones, and join us next week a couple of times and you'll see some more details on that. For the moment, bye for now. Thank you.